I never thought I'd be back in a high school classroom again, not as a student, at least. But there I was, leaning against the doorway of room 213, watching Mrs. Hawthorne finish erasing the whiteboard. It had been 10 years since I'd graduated. 10 years since I'd last seen her. Back then, she was the young, intimidating English teacher with a sharp wit and a sharper wardrobe, pencil skirts, silk blouses, heels that clicked like punctuation marks down the hallway. I used to think she belonged in a movie more than a school. Now, she was different, but not in a way that made her any less striking. The years had only deepened her presence. She turned when she heard the creak of the door. Her eyes locked on me, and for a moment, she didn't speak, just looked, head tilted, as if piecing together a memory. "Ethan," she finally said, her voice carrying that same smooth firmness I remembered. "Is that really you?" I smiled. "Guilty." She laughed softly, setting the marker down. "Well, I'll be. I didn't expect to see you here. What brings you back?" I hesitated. I could have said it was nostalgia, or that I'd been in the neighborhood, but the truth was stranger. I was here because of an invitation. A handwritten note slipped under the door of my apartment last week. No sender's name, just, "Come to room 213. Friday. 5 p.m. I have a lesson for you." It was ridiculous to think it could have been from her. And yet, I got a note, I admitted. Didn't say who it was from. Just said to be here at 5. She raised an eyebrow, stepping closer, heels clicking softly on the tile. "A note? Interesting. Well, I didn't send it. But," she glanced at the clock, "since you're here, I suppose we could catch up." The room was empty now, the late afternoon sunlight spilling in through tall windows, casting golden stripes across the desks. I took a seat in the front row, feeling oddly like a teenager again. She leaned against the edge of her desk, crossing her arms. "So," she began, "tell me, what's become of you, Ethan?" I told her about my job, freelance writing, some travel, the odd side project. I tried not to make it sound too aimless, but her smirk told me she could read between the lines. She always could. "And relationships?" she asked casually. I laughed. "You always were direct." "Occupational hazard," she replied, eyes glinting. "I ask questions. I expect answers." I shrugged. "Nothing serious lately." Her gaze lingered a moment longer, and I could swear the corners of her mouth lifted just slightly. We talked until the sun dipped low, painting the room in shades of amber. There was something in the air, not just nostalgia, but a quiet tension, a sense that this meeting wasn't as accidental as it seemed. When I finally stood to leave, she walked me to the door. Her hand rested briefly on my forearm, warm and deliberate. "It was good to see you again, Ethan," she said softly. "Don't be a stranger." I stepped into the hallway, heart beating faster than I expected. But just before I turned the corner, I glanced back and saw her watching me, that same unreadable smile on her lips. I didn't hear from her for 3 days. Then, another note appeared under my door. Same handwriting. Lesson 2. Room 213. Wednesday. 6 p.m. Only this time, there was an addition at the bottom: bring an open mind. Wednesday evening. She was already there when I arrived, the desks pushed aside, the overhead lights dimmed. The only illumination came from a small lamp on her desk, its glow pooling in warm circles. "Close the door," she said, not looking up from the papers she was arranging. I obeyed, the latch clicking shut behind me. "I thought about our conversation," she continued, finally meeting my eyes. "You've always had potential, Ethan. But potential needs guidance." She walked toward me, her heels slow and deliberate on the floor. "You like control," she said suddenly. "But you also like giving it up, when you trust the person enough." The words hit me like a slow, deliberate breath against the back of my neck. "And I," she added, "know how to teach both." I swallowed. "What exactly is this lesson about?" Her lips curved into something that wasn't quite a smile. "That," she said, "you'll discover over time. For now, you'll follow instructions." Agreed. My voice felt caught somewhere between hesitation and curiosity. Agreed. Her eyes softened slightly, but her tone remained firm. Good. Then let's begin. That night, she didn't touch me, not in the way I half expected. Instead, she gave me a strange assignment: write a story about my most daring experience, but leave the ending unfinished. When I asked why, she said, "Because the ending hasn't happened yet." And when I left room 213 that night, I couldn't shake the feeling that she wasn't just talking about the story. By the time Wednesday rolled around again, I was restless. I'd done the assignment, or at least, my version of it. 3 pages of my most daring experience, ending in an unfinished sentence that begged for completion. It wasn't just a writing exercise, it was a confession, disguised in fiction. The moment I stepped into room 213, I knew something was different. The desks were still pushed aside like last time, but now there were 2 chairs placed in the center of the room, facing each other. On the desk in front of them lay a leather-bound notebook, a black fountain pen, and a silk ribbon. Mrs. Hawthorne stood by the window, her hair catching the fading evening light. She turned as I entered, her expression unreadable. "You brought your story?" she asked. I handed it over. She didn't read it immediately. Instead, she motioned to one of the chairs. "Sit." I obeyed. She took the opposite seat, crossing her legs. The click of her heel against the tile sounded almost rhythmic, deliberate. She opened my notebook and began reading. Her eyes moved slowly, lips curling faintly now and then. Every so often, she'd glance up at me, not to comment, just to look. When she finally set the pages down, she said, "You write like someone who thinks they're holding back, but isn't." I like that. I wasn't sure if that was a compliment or a warning. She leaned forward slightly. "Do you trust me?" The question came out of nowhere. I hesitated. "I think so." "Not enough," she said, almost to herself. "But that's fine. Trust is earned, and tested." The door opened behind me. Footsteps. I turned, and a woman stepped in younger than Mrs. Hawthorne, maybe late 20s. Dark hair in a messy bun, black blouse, jeans. Her eyes were sharp, curious, and when she saw me, her mouth curved in a knowing smile. "Ethan," Mrs. Hawthorne said, "this is Claire. She'll be joining us for tonight's lesson." Joining us. The phrase landed heavy in the space between my ribs. Claire took the seat beside me, close enough that I could feel the faint warmth from her arm. Mrs. Hawthorne stood and moved behind us, her presence almost electric. "This is an exercise in awareness," she explained. "Two people. One focus. No speaking, unless I say so." She placed the silk ribbon in my hands. "Tie this around your right wrist." I hesitated, then did as she asked. Claire was given the same ribbon for her left wrist. Mrs. Hawthorne's voice lowered. "Now, you'll write something together. One pen. One page. You'll alternate words, not sentences, not ideas, words. And you'll do it without talking." The challenge was deceptively simple. Claire started, writing one word, then passing the pen to me. I added another. Slowly, a strange, fractured story began to take shape, each of us pushing the other in subtle, playful directions. Some choices were serious, others teasing. Mrs. Hawthorne circled us, watching, occasionally leaning in to read what we'd created. I could smell her perfume, feel the weight of her gaze. When the page was full, she took it, scanned it, and let out a low chuckle. "Interesting. You two are more in sync than I expected." Claire glanced at me with a smirk that made my pulse jump. We did another round this time. She had us write without using our hands. We had to dictate the letters verbally, one by one, leaning in close to the page, sharing the pen between us. Every accidental brush of fingers, every breath too near, seemed magnified. When we finished, Mrs. Hawthorne collected the paper and set it aside. "Good," she said softly. "You've learned the first step, awareness of the other person's rhythm." She moved closer, resting her hands lightly on the backs of our chairs. "Next time," she murmured, "we see what happens when rhythm becomes control." After Claire left, Mrs. Hawthorne kept me behind. She stood by the desk, flipping through my original story again. "You wrote this as if you already knew how it would end," she said. "Maybe I do," I replied. Her gaze sharpened. "Then surprise me." Before I could respond, she slipped the notebook back into my hands and said, "Lesson 3. Same time. And Ethan." She waited until I met her eyes. "Don't bring fear. Bring curiosity." That night, lying in bed, I thought about both of them, Mrs. Hawthorne's precision, Claire's unpredictable spark, and wondered which one was truly leading this game, and whether I was the student, or the subject of their experiment. When I walked into room 213 that evening, I noticed two things right away. The desks were gone, completely stacked along the back wall, and in their place stood a single table, with 3 chairs arranged around it. On the table were 3 objects: a small metronome, a blindfold, and a stack of index cards. Mrs. Hawthorne was dressed in black again, her hair pinned up with the same elegance I remembered from years ago. Claire leaned casually against the windowsill, arms crossed, eyes locked on me as if she'd been waiting. "You're late," Mrs. Hawthorne said. "By a minute," I replied. "Control begins with precision," she said flatly. 1 minute is 1 minute too many. Sit. I took my place at the table. Claire slid into the chair beside me, her knee brushing mine under the table, either by accident or not at all by accident. Mrs. Hawthorne placed the metronome in front of us and set it ticking. Slow, deliberate beats. "Tonight," she said, "we're going to explore influence. How to lead without words, and how to follow without hesitation." She picked up the blindfold and tossed it toward me. "Put it on." I hesitated for just a breath too long. Claire reached out, took it from my hands, and tied it around my head herself. The fabric was smooth, smelling faintly of perfume. "In this exercise," Mrs. Hawthorne continued, "you'll rely on touch and timing. Claire will guide your hands. You'll do as she directs. No speaking. If you resist, I'll stop the exercise, and you won't like what replaces it." The silence after that was heavier than her words. The metronome ticked steadily. I felt Claire's hands close over mine light at first, then firmer. She moved my fingers across the table, guiding them toward the stack of index cards. Her touch was precise, almost instructional. She placed a pen in my hand and tapped twice on the paper, her way of telling me to write. Without sight, every movement felt amplified. I could feel her breath near my ear when she leaned in to check my progress. Her fingers would sometimes linger just a little too long when adjusting mine. Every so often, Mrs. Hawthorne's voice would cut through the air, slower. Or, match the beat. It wasn't about what I was writing, the words were nonsense, it was about the control of pace, the surrender to someone else's rhythm. After what felt like forever, Mrs. Hawthorne's voice said, "Stop." Claire removed the blindfold. The light was almost startling. Mrs. Hawthorne stood across from me, arms crossed, studying me like a chess piece. She was deciding whether to move or not. "You did better than I expected," she said. "But you let Claire lead too easily. A man who follows too easily can't be trusted to lead when it matters." Claire smirked. "Maybe I just made it too easy for him." Mrs. Hawthorne's eyes flicked between us. "Or maybe he needs more pressure." She gathered the index cards, shuffled them, and spread them on the table. Each had a single word written on it: stop, go, switch, hold, release. "This time," she said, "you'll take turns being in control. But you'll only act when you hear the command on the card. One of you will move, the other will adapt. No questions. No hesitation." The game started simple. Claire drew go, so she tapped the pen against the paper, and I followed her lead, scribbling words as she pushed the pace. Then stop, I froze mid-letter. Switch, suddenly I was the one directing, using my hands to guide hers. But as the pace increased, hesitation became dangerous. Every time I faltered, Mrs. Hawthorne would lightly tap the table with a wooden ruler, a sharp, precise sound that made my pulse jump. By the end of the exercise, I felt both drained and wired at the same time. Claire leaned back in her chair, clearly pleased with herself. Mrs. Hawthorne walked around the table, resting a hand briefly on my shoulder. Control isn't just about holding power, Ethan. It's about knowing when to give it up, and making that choice feel deliberate. She moved toward the door. Next week, you'll both face a test. And it won't be in this room. Claire raised an eyebrow. Where, then? Mrs. Hawthorne smiled faintly. You'll find out. On my way out, Claire caught up with me in the hallway. She leaned in, her voice low. She's not telling you everything, she said. What do you mean? You'll see, she replied, walking away before I could ask more. That night, I couldn't stop replaying the sensation of the blindfold, the rhythm of the metronome, the way Mrs. Hawthorne's exercises seemed to blur the line between teaching and something far more personal. And I couldn't shake the feeling that next week's test was going to change the rules entirely. The note arrived on Monday. No envelope, no signature, just a single line written in that same confident handwriting. Thursday 8 p.m. The Blue Lantern. Wear black. The Blue Lantern was a jazz bar downtown, the kind of place you had to know about to find. I'd never been, but I'd heard rumors. Low lighting, music that could slow your pulse, and private booths in the back for those who didn't want to be seen. When I arrived, the air inside was warm, thick with the scent of whiskey and the slow curl of saxophone. I spotted Claire first, sitting at the bar, sipping something amber. Black dress, hair loose over her shoulders, eyes already on me as if she'd been tracking the exact moment I'd walk in. You clean up well, she said, sliding off the stool. She's in the back. Mrs. Hawthorne was waiting in a booth near the far wall. Black silk blouse, tailored skirt, a single silver chain at her neck. She looked completely at ease, like this was her natural environment. Ethan, she said, gesturing to the seat beside her. Claire. She motioned for Claire to sit across from us. When we were settled, she leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. Tonight is about application. We practiced control in isolation. Now we see if you can maintain it in the real world. I glanced around. People were talking, laughing, clinking glasses. And how exactly do we do that here? She smiled faintly. You'll see. The waitress brought drinks without anyone ordering. Whiskey for me, red wine for Mrs. Hawthorne, something clear and cold for Claire. Mrs. Hawthorne slid an envelope across the table. Inside are 3 cards. One for each of us. You don't show yours to anyone else. You follow what it says. No matter what. I opened mine under the table. 5 words, lead her without being obvious. I looked up just in time to see Claire smirking at me over the rim of her glass. The game had begun. I started small, leaning toward her slightly when I spoke, brushing my knee against hers under the table. She responded in kind, matching my movements, testing me. The music shifted to something slower, richer. I reached for her drink, took a sip without asking, then slid it back. Her eyebrow lifted, challenge accepted. Mrs. Hawthorne watched all of this without comment, her wine glass turning slowly between her fingers. She wasn't participating in our little dance, but she was measuring it. After a while, Claire excused herself to the bar. Mrs. Hawthorne immediately leaned in. "She's pushing you," she said quietly. "She wants to see if you'll follow her lead instead of your own. Don't let her." "Why?" I asked. Her smile was brief. "Because that's my role." When Claire returned, I shifted tactics. I suggested we move to a booth closer to the stage, making it sound casual, but with a firmness that didn't invite negotiation. She studied me for a moment, then nodded. We slid into the booth, the music vibrating through the floor beneath us. The space was more intimate now, shadows playing across her face. I rested my arm along the back of the booth, close enough for her to feel my presence without it being a direct touch. She leaned in, voice low. "You're trying to lead." "Trying?" I echoed. Her smile was slow. "We'll see." The rest of the night felt like a chess match, every move met with a counter, every shift in tone testing the edges of the rules. Mrs. Hawthorne occasionally appeared, dropping a comment that shifted the balance again, never staying long enough for me to settle into a rhythm. By the time the bar started to empty, I was wired, alert to every detail. Mrs. Hawthorne called for the check, then stood. "Lessons over," she said. "Both of you did better than I expected." Claire glanced at me with that same knowing smirk as before. "We'll see about that." Outside, the night air was cool. Mrs. Hawthorne stepped closer, her voice low enough that only I could hear. "Next time, Ethan, the lesson will be one-on-one." I almost asked with which of them, but she was already walking away, leaving me with the taste of whiskey and 100 questions. The note came on Sunday morning. No envelope this time, just a single folded sheet slipped under my door. Room 213. Tuesday. 7 p.m. Come alone. It had been weeks since the first invitation, but my pulse still jumped the same way when I read her words. When I arrived, the room was exactly as it had been on the very first day, desks in neat rows, whiteboard clean, afternoon light spilling in through the tall windows. Only one chair was pulled out, right in the middle of the room. Mrs. Hawthorne stood by the desk, arms crossed, expression calm. "Sit," she said. I did. She walked around me slowly, her heels clicking on the tile. "You've been in the middle of a game since the beginning," she said. "Between me, between Claire, between your own instincts. Tonight, you stop guessing who's leading." I turned my head slightly. "And who has been leading?" Her voice was smooth. "You'll know when you stop asking." She placed a small object on the desk in front of me, the same silk ribbon from the first exercise. "Put it on your own wrist." I tied it, the fabric cool against my skin. "Now," she said, "you'll write." "What about?" "About control. About what it means to you. And you'll do it while I decide how long you have." She set a metronome on the desk, just like before, but this time she didn't start it right away. Instead, she leaned against the edge of the desk, watching me. When she finally tapped the metronome into motion, the sound felt louder than I remembered. I started writing. Every so often she'd say slower or now faster, her tone making it clear that any hesitation would count as failure. I adjusted each time, my hand moving almost without thought, my mind focused entirely on matching her pace. Halfway through, she stopped the metronome entirely. The silence felt heavier than the ticking. "Keep writing," she said. Without the rhythm, I had to set my own, but I could feel her eyes on me, measuring every pause, every letter. When I finally set the pen down, she took the paper, read it, then folded it neatly. "You've learned how to follow," she said. "Now you learn how to take control back without losing me in the process." She stepped closer, her presence filling the space between us. "If I were Claire," she said, "you'd push back against me. You'd try to win. But with me, you've been careful. Too careful. Control isn't just about leading gently. Sometimes it's about making the other person choose to follow you." "And how do I do that?" I asked. She smiled, not soft, but sharp. "Show me." The moment was deliberate. I stood, closing the space between us. Her eyes didn't flicker, but her chin tilted just slightly upward, an unspoken acknowledgement that the choice was mine. I took the ribbon from my wrist, held it between us, and placed it in her hand. "Your turn," I said. For a moment, we just stood there, the air charged, neither of us moving. Then she tied it loosely around her own wrist. "Well," she murmured. "It seems you were paying attention after all." We didn't talk about Claire that night. We didn't talk much at all. But the dynamic between us had shifted subtly, irrevocably. When I left room 213, the sun had already set, and the hallways were empty. My phone buzzed as I reached the door. A text from an unknown number. "So, she let you lead?" "See." I stared at the screen, thumb hovering over the reply. Then I smiled, slid the phone back into my pocket, and walked out into the night. Because for the first time since this began, I didn't need to answer her.